I can't tell you how excited I am to be here. Yes, I work for the American Petroleum Institute. For those of you who are not familiar with it, we're a trade association in Washington that represents all aspects of the oil and gas industry, from exploration, production, refining, marketing, transportation, and ultimately to the service stations, although most of the service stations are owned by individuals, not the major oil companies that fly their flag. So this area is extremely important to us. Seeing the potential for Marcellus shale gas is a tremendous opportunity for the counties here, the state, and indeed the size is so potentially tremendous for the nation as a whole. And so it's an excellent opportunity. It's, of course, clean burning natural gas, which has tremendous environmental opportunities in terms of power generation, potentially transportation if you follow the Boone-Pickens plan. And so I always get very excited about talking about it. But even more importantly is that I am a native of this county. I was actually born in Clearfield, but don't hold that against me. I grew up most of my life in Pine Creek. Notice how I said crick. Anyway, I lived in Jersey Mills around there and then southern part of the valley for all the time until I eventually went to Penn State. Seeing the Marcellus start to take off is truly rewarding because I remember as a kid growing up in the valley that seismic crews went up and down all those highways in the 60s with their thumper trucks constantly. And until recently, I always wondered, well, what did they find? Did they find anything? Well, yes, they did. But unfortunately, we didn't have the technology to be able to develop it. Now we do. So now you can drill down 6,000 feet and fracture the rock so that you can produce the gas. It really is an exemplary of the oil industry and the gas industry that they continue to develop technology. So as people say, well, we're going to run out of this or that, whether it be oil or gas, the technology keeps advancing forward so that we find more and more of it. And so we find more and more energy supplies which are important for consumers, they're important for suppliers, they're important for the nation in terms of our energy balances and our trade deficit. This area is also very important to me in terms of the prospect of new oil and gas operations because as a kid, I grew up dirt poor in the valley, and a couple of jobs I had as a kid growing up were, first of all, working on a sawmill. Those of you who know where McElhattan is, I worked on a mill there and on various other mills around, and I learned that was real hard work. The other thing I discovered was I started working on a pipeline as a kid, and it was a Tidewater oil line, which, anybody familiar with the Tidewater line? Well, it runs from the Bradford fields, which are up in the northwest, all the way down to Bayonne. It was a pipeline laid in 1879, cast iron line, screwed together with collars, built by the independents to try to break John D. Rockefeller's hold on transportation. No, I didn't work on it in 1879, but I did work on it as a repair crew back as a mere child. So I've had the oil business in my blood for a long time, but unfortunately, I must say I turned to the dark side and became an economist. Because, you know, going to Penn State, it's one of those things where you start out in something, you end up in something, and you hope it works out, and fortunately for me, so far it has. And so for every speech I have, it gives me the opportunity to start out with an economist joke before I get to a couple of the main points I'd like to make. What's the definition of an economist? Well, there are many, of course, usually Harry Truman, on one-armed economist and so on, but my definition of economist is somebody who's real good with numbers, but doesn't have the personality to be an accountant. So that's my life, statistics and being incredibly boring. But in any case, I think that the whole Marcellus opportunity here is tremendous. It's a once-in-a-100-year opportunity. If you all know the history of Williamsport, also known to people outside as Billtown, this town was built on a boom. Forestry, logging, back in the 1890s. So when you see the mansions up and down these roads around here, that's where it started. This is an opportunity that could be every bit as big and could last for decades instead of just a short period of time. So it's a wonderful opportunity. It's a wonderful opportunity. The potential employment aspects were mentioned. What's really important about the employment aspects is that those jobs tend to be very good paying. The average exploration and production worker makes over 2.5 times the national average wage. It's a good paying job, highly skilled job, technologically advanced. And so for the younger folks who are thinking about a profession, I certainly would encourage you to consider that. So in terms of the area here, you'll hear a bunch of facts on the Marcellus area and what the potential balances are. I'd just like to touch on in terms of how important this is in terms of the overall U.S. and energy situation. You know, if we do have 500 trillion cubic feet of gas in this area, you're talking about something that is close to, let's just use round numbers, as 100 billion barrels of oil equivalent. That is potentially a resource of $5 to $10 trillion. That's with a T. So these things could be huge. The initial wells that they've had are rewarding. The production profiles from some I've heard are very good, even at $2.50 an MCF, which is below what it was today, having gone up. So it's a tremendous opportunity there. But how does it fit in the overall national situation? Well, you know, much has been made this year about what we need to do with energy policy. And about the only discussion that we've heard so far is we need alternatives. We need solar, wind, and geothermal. And I've heard in Washington over and over again, we're going to double solar, wind, and geothermal over the next couple years. And I would say that's great. That's a wonderful opportunity. We're going to need that electricity. All the forecasts going out say that we're going to need roughly 20 to 30% more electricity over the next 20-some years. Because if you think about everything in your house that's electrified, that just grows and grows and grows. And so even with energy efficiency, we're going to need a lot more electricity. And so solar, wind, and geothermal are very important going forward. But how big are they in terms of our energy supplies? Well, if you add up solar, wind, and geothermal right now, it's roughly 1% of our total energy use. So if you double it, that's an improvement. Make no mistake about it. But it gets us to 2%, and we still need the other 98%. Where else do we get our energy? Well, we get about 40% of it from petroleum. If you think about it, what's petroleum used for? Well, roughly 70% of petroleum goes to the transportation sector. You all probably drove here. Well, let me ask that question. Did anybody drive here in an all-electric car? Well, even if you drove in a hybrid, you came here on a petroleum-powered car. And 96% of the fuel of vehicles out there is petroleum.